So I recently gave a talk on how to use the 1D family of curves method to build a 2D bridge in HEC-RAS. This method has actually changed quite a bit over the course of the 6X releases, and so there could be a little bit of confusion about how it currently works. And so I just kind of walk through how this model works and what are the best practices that are implied by the way that it works. And when I actually gave this talk, there was a demo that preceded it, and I'll run that demo separately, but I kept just a little bit of the demo in before the talk because it raises a really important question that I get a lot, is that should you put piers in both the bridge deck and in the model itself? So I'm going to show you the demo where I actually do that, and then the question arises, which sets up the talk and how to use this 1D family of curves model, mainly focusing on how it works, because that's really going to drive how and when you use it. The next thing I'm going to want is piers. And so if I come in here and I say pier, this is my pier editor. So now we have our piers, and this is brand new. We actually just added this week. Now you can see the bridge, but also you can see these dotted lines are where the piers are. And that's because best practice in bridge modeling is to have all of your elements in both the terrain and in the bridge deck. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and kind of reproduce our piers here in the bridge deck. And so you can see that dropped that pier right there, and then it gave us another one. So we can go ahead and just drop these piers along these lines where RAS is showing us where the piers in our geometry already are, so that it's going to line up the same way.
Stanford, one question that's come in the chat is, why do we include the bridge piers in both the geometry information as well as in the terrain information? How are we calculating that, and how is it calculating, our hydraulic parameters twice?
Yes, it seems like we'd be double counting, doesn't it? But it's not. And I'm going to actually show you exactly how we do these calculations now and why we put them in twice. There's a lot going on in these bridges that is new, and that you need to know how the model is computing these as you set this up. The question is, why would I put piers in both places? Doesn't that double count? Well, if you understand what the model is doing, then those things start to make sense. There's two options. There's the 1D family of curves, and then there's the 2D pressure overtopping options. And so the one that we are starting with is the simpler one. This has been in RAS for a couple of years now, is this 1D family of curves. And the question is, what is a family of curves? And I think it's kind of a cute name. It's a family, right? Like it's a family of curves, maybe? I don't know. This is the way that we do hydraulics in 1D. Computing hydraulics in a bridge is extremely computationally expensive. And so, this was the innovation in UNet probably 40 years ago, is that instead of computing hydraulics through the bridge every time step, what we'll do is for a set of tailwaters and a set of flows, we're going to pre-compute the headwater, and then we'll go through and pick those off curves. And that just makes everything faster for the computations. And so the way that works is, we have a flow through the structure, and we have a tailwater. And so we follow the tailwater elevation along this curve until we meet the flow, and then we pick off the headwater elevation. And we just kind of populate these curves computationally at the beginning. That's why the geometric preprocessor runs before you do any actual computations. And then in real time, while we're running, we just pick these off the curves. And so this is kind of a trivial result because this is a low flow. But what's going on here? The curves get kind of janky right there, right? Like, what's going on there? Well, that's the deck, right? Because when you engage the deck, now there's a big difference between the tailwater and the headwater. And so when you engage the deck, you have your tailwater elevation, you make this big step through the deck, and for the flow, you get a much higher headwater elevation. And all of that is baked into the curves before you even do a second of simulation. And this is how our 1D bridge model works. And so what we've done is we've embedded our 1D bridge model into 2D so that you can actually do bridge computations within a 2D model. Now, we have a detailed 2D model that we will talk about a little bit at the end. why would you use a 1D simplification when you could just do a 2D bridge model? Well, the primary reason to do this is that if you only care about the water surface difference, if you only care about how the head changes through here, and you don't really care about a detailed velocity distribution through your bridge for, say, a bridge scour analysis or something like that, then you can do this in a very big model with very large cells and get a pretty good answer. And so one of the problems with regional models is that if you have a bridge and you model the bridge in kind of a detailed 2D modeling way, your bridge cells are going to limit the time step of your whole regional model. By embedding the 1D model in our 2D model, you can compute at a pretty coarse grid cell resolution and use the subgrid everywhere else and keep a reasonable time step, even though you have bridges in your model. This is not for detailed models like bridge scour. So how does it work? We go through and we compute the hydraulics as if the bridge deck, the bridge that you put into your geometry, including the piers and the embankments, aren't there. And so you get a 2D solution through there with only the terrain. Now, if you've got your piers and the terrain, it will include them. If you have your embankments and your terrain, it will include them. And that will improve the quality of this 2D hydraulic solution. Then what we'll do is we'll say, okay, you have a tailwater elevation, you have a flow, we're going to run this through our curves. There's your tailwater elevation, there's your flow. If we run this through our curves, we get a new headwater elevation. Okay, so now what are we going to do? We've essentially computed additional losses based on our bridge model. Now we want to match this bridge model headwater elevation in our 2D model. So what we do is we go in and we increase essentially, this is a little more complicated than this, but this is essentially what we do. We increase the n values across the cell faces within the bridge until the 2D model matches that headwater. And then we recompute the 2D solution. So we're never actually using a 1D solution through here. We're using the 1D solution to inform the 2D solution. Now, why do you want your bridge piers in both places? Well, if your bridge piers are in both places, then the original 2D solution will be a lot closer to your 1D 2D solution, and we'll have to do less adjustment. And we won't double count because we're considering it in the first place and then overriding it with the second place. And so that's why it's best practice to have them in both places. If the 1D solution is actually lower than the 2D solution for some reason, then we just ignore the 1D solution and we just accept the 2D solution. So for example, if you maybe didn't have your piers in your geometry deck, but did have them in your terrain, you would get more losses in your 2D model, and we just ignore the 1D solution. And so that's how this works for low flow. But then it gets more complicated. It gets more complicated because what happens when you pass through the deck, right? Well, it's the same thing, right? We're going to imagine that the deck isn't there. And so we're going to go through and do a 2D hydraulic solution as if your bridge geometry and the deck and the piers aren't there. Now, if your piers and abutments are in the terrain, we will consider them. And then we go in and we do the same thing. But there are two different ways to compute hydraulics, high flow hydraulics through the bridge. And so for the energy method, we'll look at the tailwater elevation, and now we're going to make this jump through the curves, and now we have a new higher headwater elevation. None of these losses can be accounted for in the terrain, so this is going to be quite a bit higher. And then we will increase the n values and have a new bridge solution through there. To get that solution, we will increase the n values until we match it. Now, for those of you who do 1D modeling, if you use the energy method, the water surface looks like this in the RAS result. It actually passes through the bridge. Some people feel very uncomfortable with that because water isn't supposed to go through concrete, but that's the way it looks. That's kind of how the energy solution works. And so when we actually give you a result like this in 2D, it looks a lot like the energy solution. Pressure weir, we approach this the same way. We have a tailwater elevation, we pick up our headwater elevation, but The difference here is that in 1D, pressure wear looks like water looks over a bridge. You actually will get this, the flow over the bridge and then this kind of waterfall at the tailwater. But when we do this in 2D, we're just going to increase the n values, and you're going to get something that looks more like an energy solution. Okay, so that is how we use this 1D model to get a 2D result. Essentially, we're just computing the losses from the 1D model and adding them to the 2D model. And so that's why having your bridge elements in both places, it just decreases the difference, and it means that your 1D model has to add less information. Okay, a few best practices for doing this kind of modeling. The first thing is, if you try to run a model with just kind of putting the bridge deck in, you're going to get this error. There's at least two things that you have to do. You have to add cross-section n values, you have to choose a bridge modeling approach, and you have to define your HTAB parameters. And so the first thing is I showed you, and this is not really obvious, that you would have, before you can run a model, you would have to go to options, external, internal bridge cross-sections. That's just something you have to learn, because we do have to define these Manning ends values, and that should really match what you have in your 2D model. Otherwise, you're going to get a bigger difference between your 1D result and your 2D result, and that's going to be artificial. The second thing you have to do, and we don't mandate this, in 1D modeling we mandate this. We won't run unless you push this button. And I really like that, because if you haven't pushed this button, if you haven't selected your bridge modeling approach, you haven't done bridge hydraulics engineering. You should not be using the defaults. You should be making intentional decisions about this. In the steady flow bridge modeling lectures that we pushed out, we go into detail about these. But I mean, the moral of the story is we almost never use Yarnell. Yarnell is really for backward compatibility. We use energy and momentum, and we have reformulated momentum in this most recent release. So momentum used to have some problems at low flow, but now it doesn't. And so now choosing energy and momentum and choosing the highest energy answer is probably the approach that you should take in most of your models. The general versus the prismatic. The general, the new method, is just better. If you're used to bridge modeling and you've never seen this drop down before, don't touch it. But if you're bringing in an old model, the old model will come in with the old method. And so you want to switch it to general or recommended to update it and get the value of, we used to extrapolate poorly at low flows for momentum, especially if there were big differences between the upstream and downstream cross-section, and now that's been resolved. The last thing that you need to do intentionally are the HTAB parameters. And I think that people get nervous about that because HTAB isn't a word. People don't know what HTAB means. Well, what does HTAB mean? That's right. It's the hydraulic tables. It's the family of curves. And so we're going to make that family of curves, but you have to give us some feedback on how to make that. And so you get this editor, and it won't run unless you go into here and give us at least the headwater elevation. And that's because we need to make these curves, but the question is how high do we go and how long do we go for flow on these two axes, elevation and flow? So at the very least, you have to give us a maximum elevation. And so I would, how high do you think the water will get over your bridge? That's your maximum elevation. But then it's also recommended to give it a maximum flow. And what that does is it compresses your curves. If your maximum elevation and your maximum flow are really large, then you can get poor resolution in here, and it will resolve these jumps poorly. Although you can go in and ask for more curves. So that's another way to do that. But you definitely want to go in and think about these curves. People who model unsteady bridges a lot, they start to think in terms of these curves. They start to see where potential instabilities are in these curves before they even run. And so if there are some like vertical lines in these curves, or there like big transitions or nonlinearities in these curves, that's where things are likely to go unstable. And so this is something that you want to start becoming a little bit familiar with, which is what the new bridge tool will let you do. What about cell spacing through your bridge? Well, this is something that's changed. It used to be that you only wanted one cell upstream and downstream of your bridge. And so this is good, but this was actually better because you actually wanted your upstream and downstream cross-section aligned with the cell centers, because that's actually the computational point. That's no longer the case. We have changed the model now so that if you want, you can actually have multiple cells through your model. You could have really dense resolution, but if you start getting really dense resolution through your model, through your bridge, you might want to ask yourself the question, am I still doing a simplified bridge model? Is a 1D solution appropriate here? Now, if you're low flow, well, you're actually going to get a pretty good 2D hydraulic result through here. You aren't actually going to want to update it that much with your bridge model. So maybe it's time to switch to your 2D model. But the 1D family of curves model can handle fine bridge resolution between the cross sections now. Should I put piers and embankments in my bridge editor or terrain? And of course, we've already hit this a couple of times. The answer is yes, you should put them in both places. The answer we've given so far is you should put them in both places because it makes your 2D hydraulic solution and your 1D hydraulic solution, particularly for low flow, closer to each other. So we have to kind of make up a smaller difference by increasing the n values. But there's a couple other weird things that happen too. If you have, say, your bridge abutments only in your bridge deck and not in your terrain with your mods, well, we'll go in and we will account for those losses with n values, which is maybe not the best. It would probably be better for you to account for those losses with actually blocking out that flow, but we'll go in and we'll change these cell faces so that you're getting these losses with n values. But then when we show it, we're going to show flow through those abutments. And so that can be pretty confusing. And so have confidence that we're not double counting, right? And go ahead and put your abutments and your piers in both places, and we'll take care of it. The other thing that you need to know about this model is that it's going to go really poorly if you have supercritical flow through your bridge. The bridge model can't handle supercritical flow. And so if you have supercritical flow, you do not want to use this approach. The other thing that comes up is, okay, if I'm going to stamp my piers into my terrain, how do I mesh my piers? Like, piers are just at a different scale than everything else. And so, like, how do I get a coarse scale model that have these little tiny piers in them? I'm developing a bunch of new bridge modeling guidance. This is going to be part of it. But the idea here is that, remember, it's a subgrid model. And so you want to take advantage of your cell faces aligning with your piers. And so this is a bad pier. As flow goes from this cell face to this cell face, it's going to flow. You're actually going to get flow vectors straight through your pier. Basically, the model doesn't even see this pier. This actually isn't bad. This is fine. Basically, if you enforce this with a break line, now you have a center line going through your pier. The model is still going to see most of the pier. But what's going on at the pier nose? Does it see the pier width here? It doesn't. And so it's actually going to miss the width going in this direction. So this actually works out really well. The third one, you have large cells, but you're catching both the center line of the pier and the full width of the pier. And to get that exactly right, I actually will go into 2025, RAS 2025, because the meshing tools are better there. That's really how I'll get something like this. I do have a video on this. This is something I'll do in really detailed modeling. Is I'll actually go in and trace my pier with a refinement region. And then you have to do some detailed movement of the nodes in order to get the refinement region, the cell faces to really line up. But now the model sees exactly the outline of your pier. That can also work. And then the other thing you can do is you can just use a fine mesh, which is what I did in my model. You can see this is a model the founder of RAS did. And he just used a refinement region to refine around these little piers. That's a really powerful way to do it. This is going to drive your computation time, so you don't want to do something like this on regional models. And the other thing that can happen is you need to be careful of really small cells, because really small cells can drive instability. So a small cell like this could become a real problem in a model. What if you don't want to do simplified modeling? What if you actually are doing, say, a bridge scour model, or you're kind of looking at something more detailed? The difference here is now you no longer just care about the head loss through your bridge. You actually care about the detailed velocities in the footprint of the bridge. Well, now we've added what's called the bridge 2D pressure overtopping model. And I'm not going to go deep into this. I will be generating some videos and some guidance on this in the next few weeks. So look on at the RAS webpage for that. The idea here is that the detailed bridge model, it actually has two separate models. It's what we call a two-layer model. We reproduce a second mesh on top of the bridge deck. And then we have a two-layer 2D model through the bridge. And so this is the visualization, but yeah, essentially we have a second mesh that goes over the bridge. And so then there are some other loss terms that you have to fill in, but when you look at the results, you can look at the results as bridge velocity above and bridge velocity through. And you actually get separate results for the hydraulics through the bridge and the hydraulics over the bridge. And it can account for things like pressure flow through the bridge. And then all of this can be visualized now. If you use a profile line through your bridge, the bridge deck should show up. And we have this new consolidated bridge visualization tool that will show you water surfaces and bridge and have that interact with your family of curves. Okay, so that's a really brief overview of bridge modeling in RAS and kind of what's changed. Some of this is brand new. Some of this will be available in the release. Version 6.7, when it's finalized in a month or so, that will be the final version of RAS as you know it. So what you've learned in this talk is actually going to be the way that this version of RAS will compute things from now on. We have the opportunity to rethink everything in RAS 2025, and it will be informed by everything we've learned over the last 5 years of 2D bridge modeling.